Blood and guts? Check. Huge parasites? Check. Rape and pillaging? Check. The most disturbing things you can imagine were rife centuries ago in the Viking Age, and quite common to say the least. Welcome to Bizarre History. Today we look at the normal everyday life events for Vikings you will find disturbing. Contact sport has survived down civilizations to this very day. The Viking take on contact sport, or just sport, however, was a little looser on things like rules or health and safety. There are elements of today's sport and competitions in Viking culture, but they had a much more violent take on them. Serious injury and death were not uncommon in Viking sport and games. From what can be gathered, seemingly the only rule was that a contest could be stopped at any point. So if a Viking ended up hurt or dead, it was kind of their fault. Take swimming, something we still cherish as sport and leisure to this day. The Vikings took competitive swimming and made it about anything but swimming. In their culture, the contest was not about swimming prowess, but who could hold someone underwater for the longest. The winner would reach the surface and the loser would drown. One sport involving a ball and teams, somewhere between ice hockey and Gaelic football, was so violent it was only played once a year in autumn. Tug of war, it should come as no surprise, was a Viking staple, although this would have resulted in raw hands as opposed to death. Most amazingly, food fights were so vicious in Viking culture, accounts of people losing eyes from throwing bones have been recorded. The Viking rendition of wrestling was as popular as centuries before it, yet remarkably it resembles the most extreme of WWE, not the test of strength, classic Olympic style. The field of contest contained a flat stone known as a fangella. The stone was only there for breaking an opponent's back. Writings show instances where competitors wore special weighted jackets to prevent such a disaster. It should be mentioned, wrestling was popular to keep people strong and fit, and wary of the risk of death, I guess. Fighting and brawling were commonplace. They were best dealt with and settled at the time, or they could develop into years-long blood feuds, escalating only to the death. It didn't stop at adults either. One disturbing account details a 6-year-old boy driving an axe into the head of another as revenge for a previous fight. For all the complaints of little children using iPads and phones, you can't help but be grateful after hearing this. Something we've left behind in today's world, in the majority, human sacrifice was entirely normal in Viking culture. The first trace of this disturbing ritual was found in Viking writings. Records written by the Vikings state that a human sacrifice was the highest possible offering. Moreover, these writings stated that Odin ordered it. It took as recently as 2011 for any hard evidence of human sacrifice to be found, however. In a well at Tisering, Denmark, human bones along with jewelry were discovered at a site known for its historic Viking settlement. Most remarkable is what was learned from the study of the remains. The bones belonged to children. They were bones approximately 4 to 7 years of age, and they belonged to no less than 5 different bodies. In Viking culture, Odin was believed to have gained his knowledge by drinking from a well. It's understood that child sacrifice would have been used by Vikings in desperate times of wanting to connect with the gods. For many years, human sacrifice was dismissed as propaganda in our recollecting of Viking culture. Yet, as of 2011, we have hard evidence that sacrificial wells may have been disturbingly alive and well in Viking culture. As much as sacrificing children may be an idea to make your stomach turn, it appears life in general wasn't that easy for the youngest of Vikings. A tough and violent society that held fighting and conflict as a part of everyday life, these harsh standards were upheld for all. All were expected to work, including children. The consequence of them not being able to work was disturbing enough. If any child was born with a deformity or ailment that left them unable to keep up with the demands of this culture, children would be left outside to die from exposure to the elements. Thanks to the male dominance of Viking society, girls were viewed as less valuable and were more likely to be left to die than boys. Yet, as time would tell, selective killing of children based on gender can create its own disturbing problems. A disturbing common theme of Viking life was, well, rape and pillaging. In historical terms, the Viking Age is counted as having begun in 793 CE. The raiding of villages, monasteries, and locations all along the European coast was to go on for the next 300 years. Curiously, historians were continually at a loss to understand why Vikings were going out of their way to sail, fight, and exploit other countries. The success and strong formation of Viking culture really gave no course for such a forceful approach to others. Upon realizing that Viking child sacrifice was a reality, researchers considered Vikings weren't traveling Europe purely to conquer and pillage. Vikings appear to have been roaming across Europe to capture women to make their wives. This sadly is not an over-the-top make-believe, but something that has been backed up by genetic research. The genetic testing took place in Iceland. The location was chosen as it was colonized by the Vikings and has seen, in relative terms, barely any migration since. Using specific mitochondria, the researchers were able to discover where the settlers of Iceland had come from. In the test, the results were clear as they were stark. Around 80% of Viking settlers had come from Norway, and over 60% of the female settlers had come from the British Isles. This dominant mix of nationalities suggests there were much interbreeding between the Vikings and the places they had invaded. Yet the disturbing sting in the tale lies in the location of the research, Iceland. It's nearly impossible that women of the time would have got themselves to Iceland and immigrated there by their own choice. The Vikings, by proxy, had a disturbing and fluent culture of sexual slavery. For those sensitive to historic views on sexuality and orientation, you might want to skip the next segment. It can be clearly witnessed that Viking culture had a disturbing trend of weaponizing homosexuality for shame and humiliation. Homosexual rape was a commonplace form of dominating and humiliating enemies after defeat. Viking culture did not label or hold homosexuality as evil or offensive to the gods, yet it did stigmatize and have its views fixed against it. The Vikings held a huge trait of self-reliance in their culture. A man found to be sexually subservient to another was regarded as weak, unable to be trusted, and lacking in manhood. In surrendering one's body to another man, the man in question was regarded as likely to surrender himself in other important arenas of life as well. The themes of domination, defeat, and humiliation tainted the entire concept of homosexuality, particularly with its rape of defeated enemies. Those found to be homosexual would be viewed as cowardly. Records of Vikings show an instance of a captured married couple, with both being raped by their captor as a display of dominance. Many historians point to the Viking culture, showing no more than what previous hyper-masculine societies had done before them. Most disturbing is the weaponization, however, that outside of ritual rape for humiliation. Should homosexual relations occur between friends, it was a deed of great shame. In fact, intercourse with a same-sex friend was not anything warm or loving, but a method to betray and shame someone likely to be vanquished for it. If there's one everyday normal occurrence to Vikings that would certainly disturb today, it's the hygiene. To be frank, by modern standards, they simply didn't have any. A landscape of pelt-wearing, raw meat-eating, long-traveling fighters did not bode well on the hygiene front. Throw in a near non-existence of any disinfectants, and, well, you're looking at a parasitic breeding ground. Vikings' appetite for lungs and liver uncooked would most definitely have bolstered parasites in their systems. Parasitic eggs have been uncovered in researchers' study of Viking feces at the University of Copenhagen. So disturbing as it is, everyday Vikings would be living with whipworm and roundworm up to 30 centimeters long living in their intestines, not to mention liver fluke. This would have had consequences, weakening the health of affected Vikings. Problems would have included weakened immune systems, anemia, and damage to the liver. Health and hygiene wasn't the only matter that let Vikings down in their lifestyle, but the knock-on effect that it had on other areas. The culture's appetite for fighting, along with its lack of hygiene, meant battle wounds were a serious and often fatal matter. Death by microbes from infected wounds are chronicled in many Viking tales. Arguably, most famous is that of Sigurd the Mighty. Following a victorious battle, he took the head of his opponent as trophy, only for a tooth from the mouth to scratch his leg en route, causing a fatal infection. Think what those Vikings could have achieved with all the anti-bac around nowadays. This one may not be as surprising as the brutality has survived folklore through the ages. The Vikings were a brutal bunch, and their executions were enough to make the devil blush. Most infamously is the Viking invention of the blood eagle, half execution, half dismemberment, half violent art. According to the records we have, the blood eagle was saved for significant persons and significant instances. Records available show its use on royals, no less, and in revenge for the death of a father. The disturbing execution would have been delivered thus. The victim would have been tied down prone before his killer. A sword would be used to carve an eagle spread across the back of the victim. This incision would then give the killer room to cut the rib cage away from the spinal cord. From this highly intrusive surgery, the lungs could be pulled out and draped over their shoulders to give the appearance of wings. It should go without saying there was no anesthetic or consideration for the agony this would inflict. The main consideration was that the victim would still be alive as they felt their last breath leave their lungs. If you want to hear more histories, more brutal ages and conquerors, hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and as always, thanks for watching Bizarre History.